Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today, for sharing your stories, your expertise, and your insight about this important issue. I spent a large part of my professional career working on ending the sexual exploitation of children, domestic violence, and human trafficking. And it's very important to me that as Congress, we are doing everything we can to bring awareness to this issue, to incarcerate perpetrators, and to support survivors. So each of you has brought important perspective to us today about how we might do those things, and we appreciate that very much. This session, I have introduced the National Trafficking Hotline Enhancement Act and also the Report Act in the House, which would modernize and strengthen existing reporting procedures to disclose crimes involving child sex abuse to NCMEC and ensure we're giving law enforcement the tools that they need to help identify this type of behavior and intercept and bring it to a stop. I'm very proud that in both cases, those bills have bipartisan support in this committee, and want to particularly acknowledge Ranking Member Dean for co-sponsoring the Report Act. I believe it is a very important part of legislation that I hope to see us bring to the full House. Now, with that, Ms. Basham, I'd like to return to your testimony and talk in some more depth about the concepts of how minors are enticed and groomed on the internet and how abusers target and exploit them. One of the things that the Report Act aims to do is to require electronic communication service providers to report incidents of enticement of minors on a line. Can you explain how this happens and how that type of requirement would help stop human trafficking?
Yeah, so the Report Act, first of all, is very important. So I'm really grateful that you have sponsored that. So enticement can happen in a variety of ways. First of all, the reason they target children, and that's something I need to state up front, is because they are especially vulnerable. Their children are by nature more trusting, in all of that. With the Report Act, and just in general with children being groomed online, one of the ways it is it's someone who usually is, they develop a trusting relationship online, and through that process they learn, that's why we call it grooming. It's not kidnapping, it's a form of really luring the child in to do things, and then it dives into actual coercion. So we have children who have been threatened, or their families have been threatened, and then through that they are lured to do things, or other things have happened to them through that.
And a study by RAIN found that law enforcement, and I think Mr. Pizzurro also touched on this issue, is overburdened at times by the number of leads that they have, the sheer volume of cases and tips that they're trying to investigate. And another provision of the Report Act would increase the retention period for this type of information and tip line reports to allow law enforcement more time to go back and investigate these cases. Could you explain how this measure and other tools might help law enforcement manage the growing number of tips and cases that they are investigating? Ms. Basham. We'll start with you, and then we'll hear from Mr. Pizzurro.
Okay. So I think one of the main things with all of this is So, sorry, can you state that again? I thought that you were stating it for him over there. Sorry.
Yes, my question was about retention of information. So one of the other provisions would require these companies to retain, when they have information that looks like it may be exploitative or is a tip for law enforcement, they would keep it for longer to help law enforcement deal with the volume of potential cases that are coming in. And the question was, how might that be helpful, and any other tools you can think of that we could be providing that would make the investigation of these cases something that is easier to tackle?
Well, absolutely. First of all, the number one thing is that law enforcement needs every bit of help that they can get. So that's the number one thing. They are understaffed, and we know that there is an increased burden. So that's first of all. The second thing is just simply it takes some of the burden off with some of the training. Like, law enforcement has to be trained to recognize and report this, and so it's obviously called the Report Act. So I think it alleviates some of that key burden that really needs to come off of law enforcement.
Mr. Pizzurro, what would you add in response to that question?
So 90 days was the standard going to 1 year, and that's the standard for probable cause. So the challenge is that we can't get to the victims and identify them because most likely, most of the times we're getting a case after 6 months. So the ability to actually find and locate that victim, identify that victim is really important from that retention standpoint. And one of the other things I'll add is that we need companies to actually be responsive to legal process immediately and send us that data, and we have difficulties with a lot of those companies now as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful insight. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.